Good evening.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
I don't know where my phone went.
Good evening.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Karen Forget, and I'm the Executive Director of Lynnhaven River Now, and we are happy to be able to host these candidates forums this fall, and we appreciate your giving up your Wednesday night to come out and be with us. I'm going to go pretty quickly through the logistics so we can jump right into the questions. We will have 9 questions. The first 9 questions will be asked by our panel, and those questions are prepared ahead of time. And our 3 panelists are Lynn Schultz. Do you want to stand up? Lynn is a volunteer for just about everything good in Virginia Beach. She volunteers with LR Now and CBF and Buy Fresh, Buy Local, and is very active in our community. Ben Hoyne is our second panelist. And Ben is the Policy and Campaigns Director for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. So we're happy to have him here tonight. And Wendy Vaughn is our third panelist. Wendy is also a very active volunteer, and in Virginia Beach, she volunteers with LR Now, with the Princess Anne Garden Club, and is the former conservation chair for the Garden Club of Virginia. So we have a great panel, and Dr. Emil Baraki is our timekeeper. He has cards that say 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds to keep everybody honest. So most important guy in the room. So let's get started. Our first question will be asked by, one other thing. I'm going to change up the order. So listen to who I call on, because rather than go in order, I will change around the order so nobody has to be first every time or last or whatever. So just pay attention to who I call on. The first time through, we'll just go straight down the row, but then after that, we'll mix it up. So the first question will be asked by Lynn Schultz, and we'll start with Kelly Fowler.
Okay, is this on? Okay, it's on. Offshore wind development has been recognized by many as an exceptional economic opportunity for Hampton Roads. Do you support and would you provide funding for a Virginia Office of Offshore Wind within the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, and additional funding to advance the offshore wind industry?
Do we take this off, or do we? You can do it. You can just pull it up, and then y'all can share it.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for the question. I believe absolutely I support offshore wind. I think it's going to be vital to our community, especially with transitioning to renewable resources. Excuse me. So, and I know there's been some active efforts on that. We have already started. I'm sorry.
If you want to take it off.
Take it off. Okay, I won't start over, I don't have enough time. But I absolutely support the efforts for offshore wind. I think it's going to be vital to our progress in transitioning to renewable resources and energy. And I know we're making efforts to get there by 2050, and I'm really grateful for the efforts that have been already put in place. And the funding is going to be key, being able to, and I think we already back as a city the efforts to for offshore wind. So I think we're halfway there. Regionally getting everybody on board is going to be half the battle, and we're already halfway there. So as a one of the members who's going to have been there next year to be reelected, I think that it's going to be key and one of our priorities to put in our budget, and to be able to work with our organizations like Lynnhaven River Now and the other organizations that can help us make sure we implement that plan.
And Mr. Howell is here representing Karen Mallard.
Hello, my name is Henry Howell. I got a nickname Hank because my dad was named Henry, and they called me Boy for 3 years and then came up with Hank. So I'm here for Karen. I got to know her. Oh, by the way, I'm an eminent domain attorney. I represent property owners against the government and utilities and takings cases for public use. I got to know Karen when she ran for Congress. I was a supporter early on. She was trying to get the Democratic nomination to run against Scott Taylor. She lost that. Then people came to her to run for House of Delegates. She asked my opinion. I said, do it if you want to do it. Just know what you're getting in for. She's worked really hard. She works really hard. She's a school teacher. When she was 11 years old, she petitioned the county to move the sewage plant because it was polluting the river she was baptized in, and they turned her away, and then her dad got involved, and they got it moved at 11 years old. When she was 14, she wanted to join the basketball team. Her dad wouldn't let her. Her mom signed the consent, went and found out they had no uniforms, but the boys did. And she went to the principal, the girls got to have uniforms. He said, well, nobody comes out. He says, well, how many people I got to get out there to get uniforms? He said 50. She got 150 to come out. The girls got uniforms. Then she became a teacher to teach people how to read, and her dad, a coal miner, was the first person she taught to read. So and then she came to Virginia Beach, been teaching 32 years, and she is for the environment. She comes from the mountains, and she's been protecting the environment all her life. So she's all for wind power. As far as the subsidies go, we got to keep a pretty good eye on Dominion if they're receiving anything. Thank you.
Glenn Davis.
Well, definitely. Last year or earlier, right after session, the Sierra Club had the Virginia Offshore Wind Champion Pledge, which basically is legislators that are willing to push Dominion to adhere for a timeline of producing 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030. I've always been for renewable energies. Most of y'all know me here. I served for 5 years on city council, and when I was there, I was helping push offshore wind and working to make sure that we could work with the Navy so the Navy could navigate around the turbines that we wanted to put offshore. It's great to see them coming, and I think between wind and solar, we're going to meet the deadlines that the governor and Dominion are promising, so we can go to a renewable energy climate here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you. Missy Smasal.
Offshore wind is a win-win situation for Virginia Beach and for coastal Virginia. Not only do we get to expand clean energy and reduce our carbon footprint, but it's also great for our economy and job creation. We are ideally situated here in Virginia Beach to be a leader in offshore wind. We have our deep water ports, we have a skilled workforce, but we've really dragged our feet and let some other states get the jump on us, in large part, I think, because of people have been too reliant in the Republican majority on old forms of energy. So it's time for new leaders who are focused on clean energy, and I'm a strong supporter of offshore wind.
Cheryl Turpin.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Turpin, representing the 85th House District. Welcome to the 85th House District. You're in the heart of the center. I'm a full supporter of offshore wind. I've taught AP Environmental Science for years and years now, and it's absolutely one of the pieces that is key to our economy. We've got this wonderful port, and we have the ability to bring in resources right there to then be able to take them offshore. It's going to be key to our environment. And just recently in Massachusetts, they were having the conference on offshore wind, and how exciting was it to have Dominion Energy present at that conference. That's a step in the right direction. It means that they are willing to take a look at what we need to do to have offshore wind, and I'm a proud supporter of the program.
Thank you. Bill DeSteph.
Bill DeSteph. I've supported it on City Council. I've supported it in the House. I've supported it in the Senate. We worked with the Navy when we were on City Council to ensure that we put it where it wouldn't interfere with the naval operations. Then last year, I sponsored the legislation ensuring that the cables coming up to shore would be secure, and that anyone who were dragging cables or dragging to pull up cables would be handled appropriately. The big thing with offshore wind energy is we've got to look at the recycling of the composites after we have to retire them. Anything you put in salt water normally has to be retired in 15 to 20 years. So on the other side, in the Senate, we're working on with 3 companies on recycling the composites after we decommission the wind-driven energy windmills. And then I also have to apologize. I'm going to switch with my chief of staff. I'm speaking at 7 o'clock at another event. that we set up a couple of months ago. So with that, I'm going to part my leave and then hand it over to my Chief of Staff, who will take it from here.
Thanks,
Lynwood
Bill.
Lewis.
Hi. Yes. Thanks, Karen. Lynwood Lewis. I represent the 6th Senate District, which is the Eastern Shore, a little slice of Virginia Beach, half the city of Norfolk, and Matthews County on the Middle Peninsula. You know, by the time it reaches the end of the line here, it's the old saying that everything's been said, but not everybody's said it. So I'm the last one in line, so I'll repeat a lot of what you've already heard. I absolutely support wind energy and the move towards renewables as quickly as we feasibly can. In large part, I think a lot of what Missy said is what I had planned on saying, and that is that not only is it great to segue away from reliance on fossil fuels and go towards renewables with wind, but also the economic development impacts and potential for wind, given our unique situation here on the East Coast, makes us a prime area for real economic development when it comes to wind energy.
Thank you. Yeah, you're going to join us up on the stage. Thank you. Jill Eiler. Eiler or Eilers? Eiler. Jill Eiler. And I also want to call your attention, if you haven't looked at your program, the questions are all right inside the cover to the program, so you can follow along with the panel questions. We also put them there in case you want to go back and look up any information later. And there are profiles or little bios on each one of the candidates in the program also. So our second question will be asked by Benjamin Hoyne, and we'll start with Glenn Davis.
Thanks. Good evening. As Karen mentioned, I'm Benjamin Hoyne, Policy Director for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Wish you all the best of luck in the next 2 weeks and look forward to working with you in Richmond. The question is, joining with 9 other East Coast states in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, otherwise known as RGGI, offers Virginia the opportunity to not only take steps towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also bring significant funds into the state to put towards priorities like assisting localities with coastal flooding. Do you support Virginia joining RGGI? If not, what are your objections?
So I like the concept. RGGI is, for those of you that don't know, is kind of a free market system where the states that can't get down to the limitations on greenhouse gas emissions have to purchase credits, and those that exceed what they have to do have those to sell. It's a great concept. The problem is I've been working for 2 years trying to figure out where Virginia starts. You see, I learned from what was going on at the end of the Obama administration with the EPA, when they wanted to put regulations and limitations on greenhouse gas emissions on each state, that states like Virginia that have been proactive, that the taxpayers that shew out there have been paying to be proactive to bring down greenhouse gas emissions, well, all that proactiveness we weren't getting credit for. But states like West Virginia that really hadn't done much, well, all they had to do was do some of the stuff Virginia's always done. So my concern is I want to know, does Virginia start at a neutral position where we don't have any credits to sell but don't have to buy them? Or do we start at a position where we have credits to sell and can take the money and put towards flooding mitigation? Or do we start at a deficit where we have to buy credits and take money that we could use for things like flooding mitigation, but instead have to buy credits from other states? And I'll say in the meantime, we already have one of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions in the nation without doing that.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Carolyn Mallard fully supports joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. She will work with Lynnhaven River Now to bring that about. I might add that if you're for it, getting Karen up there will be helping to make it happen. She's the type of person as a teacher who can get along with a lot of different people. Those people from Southwest Virginia, mostly Republicans, will recognize her accent and that smile that allowed her to win the beauty pageant of Miss Wise County and go on to be runner-up in the Miss Virginia contest and use the money to go to UVA Wise. So they'll like her. I mean, Jerry Kilgore is a cousin of her. He's a big deal out there. So if you want someone who works hard, who knows a school teacher who doesn't work hard, and is ready to take that to Richmond at the age of 56, and she's your lady. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lynwood Lewis.
Oh, let's see. First test is trying to work the microphone. Is it on? Okay. Yeah. So, yes, actually, I have been the Senate patron of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative for the last 3 years. Once on my own, once for the McAuliffe administration, and last year in conjunction with the Northam administration. So fully support joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We are not plowing new ground here. There are 9 members, soon to be 10. New Jersey left and is about to come back in. In addition to that, there are 7 other states across the country that are looking at joining other regional initiatives and or coming up with a carbon taxation system. As Delegate Davis said, it is a free market concept. It is applying free market principles to attaching a actual real financial cost to a societal problem. It has been effective in those 9 states. Those 9 states actually had lower rates of energy per kilowatt hour than Virginia did. And so the horror stories you hear about the cost for electricity and so forth going through the roof, they're not there. The schools are open up there. They've got economic activity up there, and some of them had rates of growth that surpassed Virginia in the last couple of years. So,
Thank you. Cheryl Turpin.
As an AP environmental science teacher, I can tell you that climate change is a man-made, making our sea level rise, which is a concern here in Norfolk as well as Virginia Beach, since we are ground zero on the East Coast for flooding. We've got crazy weather patterns. We've got to take care of those. We need to enter the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative to bring much needed funding to projects that were identified by the Newberry report that was commissioned here by the City of Virginia Beach. We've got so much to do here in the City of Virginia Beach in regards to our flooding, and this is just the very beginning of how we fund this. And basically, it's putting corporate polluters need to carry their fair share to save our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to do my best to represent the senator right now. Obviously, he is an expert on most of these topics, and I will be a poor substitute, but I appreciate you having me here. He did want to point out that in the last several years, Virginia has voluntarily lowered our standards on RGGI, which at some point puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to lowering ourselves once again, because we're already so much lower than we've had to have been in previous years. Like anything, this is legislation that needs to be looked at carefully and considered, and there are always nuances within each piece of legislation. Senator DeSteph, of course, would look at that at any bill that's reintroduced this year. But he does also have concerns on how the RGGI regulations might affect folks on fixed incomes should energy costs increase.
Thank you. Missy Smasal.
I fully support Virginia joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The 9 member states who are currently part of RGGI have had a net benefit of over $4 billion and 40,000 jobs. And while year after year it gets debated whether or not we join it, Virginia is losing out on $200 million a year by not joining. It's time for us to focus on clean energy solutions. RGGI provides a path to actually fund these solutions while dedicating ourselves to lowering our carbon emissions. And I think it's a common sense solution. Should we flip these seats, we will join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
Thank you. And Kelly Fowler.
Thank you. The answer to the question of how do we begin is we begin by joining. I think we've looked at this legislation carefully. It's been up for years. We are not the first. 9 or 10, almost 10 other states have done it now. So I don't think how we're going to get it done is going to be a problem. And the idea that it's going to cost the ratepayer is just false. We regulate the Dominion Power. We regulate the Public Service Corporation. So we can make sure that it doesn't cost the ratepayer. So there is no excuse. And I adamantly support joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
Thank you. Our third question will be asked by Wendy Vaughn, and we'll start with Missy Smasal.
The effects of climate change are very apparent in recurrent flooding in Virginia Beach and elsewhere in Hampton Roads. Given what we are learning about trees and their ability to prevent flooding, not to mention their ability to take in toxic carbon dioxide from the air. Would you be willing to support legislation that would give localities the authority to increase tree preservation requirements? Are you willing to sponsor that legislation?
Thank you. Localities should have some leeway when it comes to focusing on tree preservation and responsible land conservation. One tree can take up to hundreds of gallons of water in a course of one day. So we know that this can make a big difference in terms of flooding mitigation. We need to do everything that we can to protect these green spaces. And one of the green spaces I'm particularly concerned about is First Landing State Park, where we have a very valuable maritime forest. And I've been talking to some voters who are very concerned about an initiative that my opponent, Bill DeSteph, has put forward that would create bike paths that go through sensitive areas of the park that could really harm the health of that valuable forest that mitigates flooding for our constituents in the northern part of Virginia Beach. So hopefully we can work to elect people who are focused on responsible land conservation and tree preservation.
Thank you. Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Senator DeSteph is the vice chair of the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding. So I assure you there's no one who is more concerned and educated on this subject right now, and he knows the value of trees and what they bring to our landscape. He's also the vice chair of the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund. So again, bringing some much needed funding to the Chesapeake Bay area. He's working with the city, as he did on City Council, as he did in House of Delegates, and as now in the Senate. There is no legislation that he won't take a look at and consider. It's all a matter of how it's written. He works with the city on their legislative agenda, and if something like that were in their request, he would take a hard look at it to make sure it benefits our community. I would like to point out that First Landing and the bike path there, it is my understanding that those are paths that already exist and they are being shored up. These are not new paths that are being built. He fought very hard for a budget amendment to make sure that was possible based on tremendous constituent feedback about the importance of those bike paths. Something that he was asked to do, and it's something that he's delivering to his constituents. Thank you.
I just want to tell you, if you all are more comfortable pulling the mics off the stands and passing them, feel free to do that, or you can pull the mic up, whichever is more comfortable for you. And we'll go to Kelly Fowler.
Well, I not only think that we should allow localities to regulate their tree preservation requirements. I think we need to require them to. We need to have some accountability on these localities to let the developers and develop property. I've seen this firsthand in being in real estate, where they will develop a whole area of land, build houses on it, even build it too low actually that it's supposed to be, and create flooding issues, and then don't replace any of the trees. The accountability and the enforcement is just not there. So I think it's our job at the state level to have some accountability on these localities so that we can protect people and protect people from flooding.
Thank you. Lynwood Lewis.
Yes, I'd be willing to consider legislation like that. I think it's important, particularly, and that's a prime example of legislation giving localities an option to make those decisions at the local level about how they're going to approach that issue. I think the conservation environmental benefits are very real, and I think giving the localities that tool in the toolbox would be very important. So, and I suspect that would come through local government where I sit, so I would be very friendly towards that should a bill like that come before me.
Thank you. Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Karen would support empowering localities in every way she can. She understands government closest to the people is the most responsive government. Empowering localities allows them to hear from people who have easy access to them. My father, who went to Richmond often, said the toughest job in government was being on city council, because people can get to you every week. They have a harder time getting to Richmond, and the best job is in Washington, where they never come to see you. Anyways, he supports local authority to do these sort of things 100%.
Thank you. Glenn Davis.
You know, I agree. Serving in local government is the hardest place to serve. I know. I did it for 5 years. It's how I know most of y'all here. You know, when I was on city council in 2012, we celebrated. We increased Virginia Beach's urban forest by 38%. And now the city just recently adopted a goal that increases by 45%. And we know that's important as what we've expressed here because there's over $263 million in annual savings due with runoff protection as well as increase in property taxes. So there's tremendous value, and you're right, I know it firsthand. I've been at both levels of government. And I definitely support giving more control over to localities. I always have. If you look back on anything I did in city council, I kind of had my problems with the Dillon rule, but I'll tell you, devil's in the details. So we've got to figure out what that legislation says and how much control, right? There is a reason why we have the Dillon rule. I'm not a big fan of as tight as it is today. Most other states have adopted a hybrid version, and I think we need to look at that. So localities have a little bit more control in a number of different areas that would allow them to do what they need to do best to control this and other measures.
Thank you. Cheryl Turpin.
For the past 2 years, it's been my honor to put forth legislation in support of trees and protecting trees. There's a district, it's District 8, it's up in the Arlington area, that has very specific code on the books that say how to preserve old growth trees. My bill simply was to expand what was already on the code to make it statewide. And it seemed like a very simple task to give localities the authority to protect old growth trees or big trees. We know big trees take in more water, they take in more carbon dioxide. It really are the things that are going to help save the earth. And it got blocked by the subcommittee that was chaired by Delegate Stoley. And that bill died 2 years in a row in subcommittee. So this year I look forward to bringing it forward yet again. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to call your attention to the cards before we move to the fourth question. I hope everyone received a note card when you came in. We have people who will pick those up from you. If you have a question on one, just hold it up. And Vince or Helen will come around and pick those cards up from you. If you need a card, hold up your hand and they'll bring you one. Question 4 will be asked by Liz, I'm sorry. And we'll start with Lynwood Lewis.
Okay. What is the most important issue in your district, and what is your plan of action on this issue?
Well, that's an easy question for me. I represent the 6th Senate District, which, as you may recall from the localities I listed when I introduced myself, is at the pointed end of the spear when it comes to sea level rise and resiliency issues. And so that's the most important issue facing my district. I am the chair of the Recurrent Flooding Committee, co-chair with Delegate Keith Hodges, and so we consider this issue 4 or 5 times a year when we meet and hear these presentations. I've been fortunate enough to start the Coastal Resiliency Fund, which I am hopeful in January with perhaps a new and more favorable climate will be funded. And we've also put some more tools again in the locality's toolbox, real estate tax relief for those who make their properties more resilient. We've expanded Virginia's CPACE program to include resilient projects as well as green energy projects for commercial properties. And we've also worked to establish the Office of Special Assistant to the Governor for resiliency and sea level rise, and that is Norfolk Zone and Phillips. So I think we're nibbling around the edges. We're doing some good stuff. The next thing I'm looking at is a regional approach, a regional effort with a regional framework through legislation in Richmond, as we have done with transportation in Hampton Roads, and see what we can do with that. So,
thank you. Glenn Davis.
Sure. So there's a number of important issues. We can talk about education, but probably the biggest one still in my district is flooding. When I was elected to city council, I represented the Green Run area and the areas around that area, and the first thing they told me was, Glenn, we need help on flooding. And I fought for 4 years to get money to start dredging the neighborhood lakes in the Green Run area and to start going through the infrastructure. And it was amazing when we ran robots down the sewage infrastructure and stormwater infrastructure, and we saw some pipes 40% clogged. There's no place for that water to go when you're 40% clogged in your stormwater pipes. So we have put the money together when I was on city council to start alleviating that, but it's not done. It's not over. There's still a lot of flooding issues, as y'all know firsthand, in Virginia Beach, especially in my district. We need to help support local governments with other projects they need to do. The cost is just tremendous for local government to continue flooding or dredging all the lakes they have and the rest of the stormwater maintenance facilities. They need additional help, and the state needs to be there to provide that assistance.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Good question. I have to confess, it wasn't on the list that they gave me from the campaign. But, okay, so I know Karen, as I've professed. I would say, knowing her, it'd come down to two things to choose between. One would be fully funding localities for state mandates for education. The other would be gun violence action. I'd have to say she'd say gun violence is very close to her. She wants action taken. Reasonable. I mean, her husband's a gun owner, her brother's a gun owner. She comes from Southwest Virginia, but she feels strongly about reasonable gun regulation to make some steps towards abating the gun violence we have. I'd say that's it.
Thank you. Cheryl Turpin. Oops.
That didn't count towards my time, did it? Just. I ran in a special election right after Hurricane Matthew came through, and we had tremendous flooding. And I knocked on doors, and people were in tears, and their stuff is all in pods. And I thought, well, how long is this going to take? And then I decided to run in 2017. 7 months later, I knocked on the same doors, and their stuff was still in pods. And they're like, Cheryl, we can't get the help we need. There's so much we can do in regards to flooding. Absolutely, the key is joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The formula from the funds that come in is slated to give 50% of the money coming in to coastal Virginia to mitigate against flooding. So they are a two-pronged thing, but that's our best approach on how we are going to handle the ongoing causes of flooding. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Hi there. As you know, the 8th Senate District does encompass a lot of the delegates' districts, so I would concur that a lot of these topics are in the forefront of Senator DeSteph's mind. But I'd have to say the most important issue facing the constituents of our district are whatever that constituent is calling us about on that particular day. We take every single call, email, and inquiry very, very seriously. And so obviously the most important issue is the one that we're dealing with at the moment. It can be DMV, it could be vital records, it could be veterans issues. As the senator's gone door to door, he's spoken to a lot of people that think education and student debt is very important. Certainly healthcare and access to healthcare and access to affordable healthcare is very important. Again, I mentioned the veterans issues. One of the top priorities for Senator DeSteph is to continue championing the policies that got us to be the top state to do business in the country. Virginia is the top state to do business. He will not stop working until we are the top state for all of the issues in education, veterans issues, healthcare, et cetera. Thank you.
Missy Smasal.
It's Smasal. Just
Smasal.
putting out there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you corrected me.
Talking with voters, especially for the first 5 months of my campaign throughout Senate District 8, their number one concern was climate change and sea level rise and the effects that would have on the investments that they've made in their homes and businesses. Now, the most pressing thing I've heard in the past few months has changed a lot. We're much more focused on gun violence prevention over the past few months in this district. However, in terms of a long-term issue, climate change and sea level rise are what people are focused on. And whether you're a Democrat or an independent or a Republican, we're all concerned about our homes, about our businesses, and we're concerned about whether our kids can stay here and build sustainable homes and lives here. So we need to focus on funding clean energy, joining RGGI to do so, banning offshore drilling, and protecting our coastal way of living.
Kelly Fowler.
Thank you. The number one issue in my district is flooding. From the get-go, we knew this. And there are a variety of reasons why we flood. And I think it's important to look at why we flood to figure out how we solve our problems. First, we would talk about sea level rise first and foremost. And of course, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is one of the key elements that's going to help us move in the right direction with that. We've also got the issue of local development. I had a bill last year that had to do with the stormwater maintenance facilities, the ponds, we call them BMPs, that are all over the city. And I'm not sure how many of you all know that there are about 2,000 of them in Virginia Beach. 2,000. And only about half of them have maintenance agreements on them where someone actually is required to maintain around the banks of them. So that means that we don't have any requirement to maintain around them, which means they're going to get filled up quicker with sediment, and they're going to have to be dredged more often. So quickly, just to say that bill did not make it out, so we have no requirement for maintenance agreements for stormwater maintenance facilities. And I think also a third thing would be funding to help us solve our flooding problem.
Thank you. Our fifth question will be asked by Ben Hoyne, and we'll start with Cheryl Turpin.
Balloons are responsible for needless suffering and death of our birds and marine animals. Currently, Virginia law allows for the intentional release of up to 49 balloons of any type within a 1-hour period. All of these balloons come down as litter, and most end up in our waterways. Would you support eliminating this provision allowing intentional balloon releases and treating them with the same fines as other litter? Would you sponsor that legislation?
I think all of that is a yes, yes, yes. We even have gone as far as banning balloons in some of our schools. I know when I was at Tallwood, we made the movement to be balloon-free. I know at Cox, we are very limited on our usage of balloons because once you get started with balloons, they end up in places they don't belong, like bird bellies and places and fish. And so we know that the first thing to do is to ban balloons. I agree.
Kelly Fowler.
Well, I just want to echo what Delegate Turpin has said because that's a no-brainer. We shouldn't be releasing balloons every time I see that being done. There is no purpose that would outweigh the horrible tragedies that can cause within our environment. So I absolutely agree and would love to champion something like that and make sure that we can get it passed this year.
Thank you. Missy Smasal. Smasal. I'll get it.
We can just go with Missy.
Smasal.
As the mom of 2 young kids who are very concerned about animals, everyone in our family knows the dangers that balloons can pose to sea life, to sea turtles, especially they're focused on my kids. And really, balloons pose a threat to birds, and they clog up our waterways. And it's time that we add balloons to the litter code for Virginia. We should codify that. Also, in terms of just clean water and clean land, we need to address plastic and litter. Unfortunately, Republican majorities have blocked localities' attempts to regulate plastic bag use in different localities, and that's something that we should see changed, focus on actually preventing the litter in the first place.
Thank you. Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph. Keep going. He'll turn it on.
I got to admit, this is one that we did not talk about. That said, I think that the senator would be open to any kind of conversation, any kind of legislation that would introduce any kind of initiative that would reduce the amount of pollution and plastic in our environment. Like any legislation, we have to see the bill, we have to read what's in it, we have to find out what the unintended consequences could be. But if you know Senator DeSteph, you know he's open to a conversation. You know his door is open. He wants people to come in and tell him why he should support something like this. If it's something that his constituents want, absolutely it's something he's going to consider. I do think that we're all really lucky to be living in a time where we can go to places like Trader Joe's and bring our bags back and get our paper bags and go to, well, I was going to say Farm Fresh, but Harris Teeter or whatever it's become now. People are aware. People aren't releasing as many balloons. They aren't doing that. They know what the effects are on the environment. So, again, it is something to be considered. And if you know the senator, you know it's something that he would take very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn Davis.
Well, I know this is beat up on Republican night, but a little history lesson. The ban the balloon bill was a Republican bill from Senator McWaters back in the day that didn't get out, but it was a Republican bill. But the reason why there's issues, how many of you are under the age of 45 and are married and threw rice at your wedding? And you went through rice at your wedding under 45? Of course not. Why not? It's not illegal. Why didn't you do it? Because you know better. Because when you went to the church, they said we don't throw rice anymore because it hurts the birds. We throw bird seed, right? Saying we have to ban balloons in schools because we don't know where they'll end up is saying we should ban rice because God knows where the rice is going to end up. You educate people. My concern about just saying we're going to ban the release of balloons is some people, if they think it's a stupid law, they don't pay attention. But you know what stops it? Education stops it. It's why people don't throw rice anymore at weddings. I didn't throw rice at my wedding. I thought about it, and then they told me what happens with rice with the birds, and my wife and I decided we'll use birdseed instead. And if we start educating industries like the funeral industries and the celebratory industries, then they'll start relaying that information as well. I'd rather give you a lot of money to do that education online and in our schools so the right thing's done as opposed to just trying to outlaw it and people still do it anyway.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Yes. Yes.
Short and sweet. Lynwood Lewis.
Glenn is correct. This is the Jeff McWaters bill from a number of years ago, and Jeff took a lot of grief for introducing this bill. But I will tell you that the Virginia Aquarium folks, who obviously supported the bill, made a very strong case on merits for Jeff's bill. So I would certainly take a look at it. The devil, has been said here ad nauseum tonight, is always in the details. So we wanted to look at the language of the bill. But again, I remember the merits of the bill as advocated by the Virginia Aquarium folks, and would be very interested in seeing some sort of limitations put on those balloon releases. So let me say one other thing before I do. I cautioned Karen when I got here because of a scheduling snafu. I'm going to have to ease out stage left here in a little while, but don't think it's anything anybody said. I've just got to. We've had a little scheduling problem here, so thank you.
Thank you. Question 6 will be asked by Wendy Vaughn, and we'll start with Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
All of the cities and counties in Hampton Roads have publicly opposed seismic testing and drilling for oil and gas off of our coast. Would you support legislation that would remove the section of the Virginia Code that supports oil and gas drilling off of our shores? Would you support legislation to restrict seismic testing and oil and gas drilling infrastructure in our 3-mile Virginia offshore waters?
As I sit here looking out at everyone, I'm delighted you're out here participating and interested in this and getting the candidates on the record. It is totally cool. I mean, we got to do more of it. Yes and yes.
Glenn Davis.
When I was on city council, this came before us, and the tourism industry supported it, the resort industry, the citizens, it was supported, it was part of our agenda. But times have changed, and people have looked at the threats that exist in this, and the opportunity for renewables has grown so much more. And the city of Virginia Beach has now taken a different stance, and so has the industries. And I listened to them, so I would not support the drilling off the coast of Virginia. And I'll tell you another reason too. It's if we were even to think about it, we're 20 years down the road before we can even start looking at getting oil out there. Well, if we need oil off our shores in 20 years, we've really missed the boat on the use of renewables in 20 years.
Lynwood Lewis.
I'm getting the hang of it now that I've got to leave. But yes, I have supported offshore, supported all of those things. And again, if you do the simple cost-benefit analysis, it's just not anything in it for the coastal communities and so much risk. And I'm very proud that I think every jurisdiction in my Senate district has passed a resolution in support of banning offshore And also, I don't know if it's extended to seismic testing, but I certainly support a ban on seismic testing as well.
Kelly Fowler.
I'm always a little amazed when this comes up, and it comes up often because, you know, we do have widespread support to ban offshore drilling and the seismic testing. So, of course, I support it, and especially since all the localities support it and everybody seems to be on board with it. So why not bring it to the floor and let it have a vote? So I absolutely support that.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph. I think you don't have to turn it on and off.
Got
the
it.
sound person will activate it.
No, it's just operator error. Senator DeSteph was actually very proud this past year to sponsor SB 1573, which banned offshore drilling. We had a number of constituent groups locally. The Council of Garden Clubs, Laura Huber, as a lot of you know, was a big champion for that. Virginia Conservation Network, Oceana.org, Lynnhaven River Now, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Sierra Club, the Southern Environmental Law Center. They all worked with Senator DeSteph to try and get that bill out of committee. He also worked with the Manufacturing Development Commission, the Virginia Oil and Gas folks, trying to find a way to build consensus to get that bill out of committee. And it came awfully close, but it was defeated 8-7 in Senate Ag. And we'll see what next year brings, but he was definitely not only a supporter of that bill, he was the chief patron of that bill.
Thank you. Missy Smasal.
Virginia needs to ban offshore drilling and seismic testing. It would have negative consequences for our naval operations, for our fisheries, for our tourism industry, and just for the general health of our environment. We also need to work as a state to make sure that there's a federal ban on offshore drilling. I served as an officer of the Navy, as a surface warfare officer, and I navigated ships in the Gulf of Mexico where there were oil rigs, and I understand the navigational hazards that they would pose to our naval operating area off our coast, so it's essential that we ban it. Bill DeSteph has been ineffective. Either he did not have enough sway with his own party to get this legislation through, or he did not really give it much effort. But either way, he failed to deliver an offshore drilling ban. I will work to make sure that we find coalitions to get an offshore drilling ban through.
And Cheryl Turpin.
This is kind of a hard act to follow when you agree with what everybody has said, but absolutely, offshore drilling does not belong off our coastline, as well as seismic testing. We know that the Navy opposes it. We know the City of Virginia Beach has written a proclamation in support of banning offshore drilling, and it absolutely would be my honor to vote, you know, or carry the legislation to ban that off our coastline. So,
thank you. Question 7 will be asked by Lynn Schultz, and we'll start with Jill for Bill DeSteph.
As a Dillon Rule state, we are limited in what we can do at the local level without enabling authority from the state. How can we increase regional cooperation and have a stronger regional voice in the General Assembly in Richmond? Well, Senator DeSteph is the chairman of the Hampton Roads Caucus, which is a bipartisan, bicameral group of 33 legislators that represent our region. And most of the, well, all the legislators that are currently in office up here on the dais are members of this group. We have worked together with our neighbors to try and fulfill initiatives and policies within our community that really bring, you know, the best of the best to our community. I've seen it firsthand. They put politics aside, they put ideologies aside, and what they do is they work together to make sure that funding, legislation, education, whatever it's needed that will bring the best to Hampton Roads is available to us. He's worked diligently on that for the past several years. He's been chairman for the past several years, and he looks forward to continuing that work.
Missy Smasal.
Many of the challenges that we face in Virginia Beach are also the same that we face as a region here in coastal Virginia, from dealing with climate change and sea level rise to transportation and infrastructure concerns. We need to approach this with one voice as a region. We have challenges that we face, but we can look at them as opportunities if we can work together and move forward on a sustainable path together.
Cheryl Turpin.
Yes, I was just going to echo the same thing. We do have the Hampton Roads caucus. We do sit, we gather together, we break bread, we have coffee together, we discuss the issues. It reaches all the way over to the peninsula, Hampton Roads, over into Portsmouth, Suffolk, Chesapeake. It's a broad group of people. We do sit around. We try to come up with a common goal. Fairfax County is so good at this. When they come into session, they know there are 3 issues, and across the board, everybody they know from Northern Virginia is going to vote on those issues, and they know exactly how they're going to vote. And I'd love to see the Hampton Roads Caucus get as cohesive as the Northern Virginia group coming down, the Northern Virginia Caucus. And, you know, we've got work to do, and we can do it together.
Thank you. Glenn Davis.
I think I'm the only one up here with city council experience, so that's why, you know, the issue with regionalism isn't us up here. It's the cities themselves. And I saw this firsthand when I was on Virginia Beach City Council. Trying to get the cities to work together is very difficult. I won't say there's kind of fiefdoms, but everyone likes to have their own area of responsibility, and getting people to cross over is very difficult. It's why Barkley Wynn from Norfolk, myself from Virginia Beach, Rick West as a council member in Chesapeake, joined together to create the Shared Services Committee when I was on council. We got together every month with our city managers and a C-level official from one of the biggest companies in our city. So it was Dollar Tree, Norfolk Southern, and Amerigroup at the time. And we get together to see how cities could work together and share services or resources. And we got a lot of good stuff done, and that planted the seed for growing regionalism. Look, when I was first elected to city council, one of the first meetings was having Charlotte come here and talk about Charlanta. Back in 2008, they talked about working across state lines to grow and bring businesses, and we have a hard time sometimes working across city lines. We've gotten a lot better, but there's still some stuff to do, but we need people to understand where the problems truly are, and it's not with the few of us sitting up here.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Independent cities are unique to Virginia, and it makes for a lot of fiefdoms. Also, all the cities have different histories. Norfolk was the oldest. Portsmouth had the military shipyard. But Norfolk was the center, the commerce center, the center for the military. Then we had Princess Anne County and a little city called Virginia Beach till 1962, when the Kellums and other people in Princess Anne County thought it'd be good to prevent annexation by Norfolk in the Newtown area if they joined with Virginia Beach and made a city, so there'd be no more annexing. And they guaranteed the mayor of Virginia Beach 2 terms. Well, we know where the power went in Virginia Beach, which is fine, but it's just different than Norfolk, or different than Portsmouth, which is a core city that's had struggles with poverty. Then you got Chesapeake, a bedroom community with agricultural roots. You get over to the peninsula, Hampton and Newport News, they're thriving. Why? Because everyone doesn't have to deal with the tunnel if they're doing business in Newport News or Hampton. But anyway, it's not easy. It's not easy. And no one's going to give up the power of any of the cities. All I can recommend to you, stop. Karen will build bridges.
Thank you. Kelly Fowler.
Well, I do appreciate the fact that we have the Hampton Roads Caucus, but I don't think we've had a meeting in quite a while. I think there was one recently, but it can do a lot more. It really can. I was really disappointed in the lack of unity that there was in session when it came to bills like Reggie, like when I stood up there and fought for 2 budget amendments that had to do with Reggie, and I didn't have support from the Virginia Beach Caucus. I didn't have support from the region. So one way would be to get on the same page, and I know meeting every once in a while and breaking bread is good for relationships, but there's a lot more to be done, and maybe we need leadership that's going to do that and bring us to the table to work together on the common issues. We have the HR TAC, we have the HR PDC. I think we need something that's going to be regional that has to do with the environment, so that we can put in place. And how we do that, it could be a commission, very similar to HR PDC or HR TAC, something regional. So I think that would be the best approach, is to strengthen the Hampton Roads Caucus and then also to get something regional official on the books.
Thank you. Question 8 will be asked by Ben Hoyne, and we'll start with Kelly Fowler.
Governor Northam recently announced the goal of getting to 100% renewable energy generation in Virginia by 2050. Do you support that goal? And please tell us 2 actions you support that will move our state in that direction.
Well, I absolutely support the goal of getting to the 100% renewable energy by 2050, and I think that that was the first step, is just setting a goal. We needed to have a goal to kind of keep in mind that this is where we're heading, and then next is putting the plan and the process in place. So I think I'm just very pragmatic where, you know, we need to look at the whole picture, which the problem, and then look at the solution and put that in place. So I think we're kind of on to step 2 where we're identifying the problems. So I look forward to working on that with the governor.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Imagine 100% renewable energy in Virginia supplying our energy. We have the technology and resources to do it. A monopoly has control over natural gas infrastructure, coal infrastructure, mainly it's natural gas that they're into. As long as they have the political power over our legislature, they're not going to work with reaching any of those goals. Karen wants to get there by 2035. Let's get there. What are we waiting for?
Thank you. Glenn Davis.
Well, I'd like to get there by 2020, but I'm not a scientist, neither is Karen, so I'm not sure either one of those are realistic. But I love what the governor has set as a goal. You see, we always need to have a goal out there, and I've always said we will be 100% renewable one day. It's just a matter of when. And we've made tremendous strides. And I don't know if y'all saw Dominion Energy's recent press release to go along with the recent one by governors, but in a couple of years, we will be 45% of all the energy for the Commonwealth will be renewable, and that's what Dominion has committed to. So we need partners. We don't need enemies. We don't need to put horns on people's heads. We need everyone to work together, and that's what we can do. There's 2 things we have to do. The first is we need to actually put a PR campaign together so people realize Virginia can lead on this and is leading on this. We want to bring industries here. Look, there's not that many new industries that we can create sustainable jobs going into the next century on, but renewable energy is one of them. And if we don't start talking about us leading the way, it's not going to happen. The second thing is we have some amazing companies out there that are leading, but they need some help, and they need tax credits when people come up with this new technology to get it out there and get it in place. So I think we look at tax credits to grow that demand for it, and also to help grow the industries with PR. I think we're going to get there pretty quick, and if it's 2050, awesome. If it's 2040, even better.
Cheryl Turpin.
Absolutely. 100% by 2050 is absolutely, we need to have that as our goal. We obtain it by offshore wind, developing our offshore wind, make sure that we are utilizing what Dominion has already agreed to do, make it bigger, make it better, and also to increase our solar. I know that the Navy has a solar array, a panel of solar panels are out there. It's like a farm. And they are already beginning to utilize renewables even within the Navy here in the Tidewater area. So there are lots of great things out there that we can utilize, and I look forward to being 100% by 2050.
Missy Smasal.
I fully support the governor's plan for renewable energy by 2050. And the General Assembly needs to do 2 things. Number 1, codify that goal into actual law. And they need to perform their regulatory function and ensure that our utility companies meet those goals by 2050. The biggest thing that we need from members of the General Assembly is to make sure that they're being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars and that we're investing in clean energy going forward from here. We know that's our goal. We know we're moving toward it, and that's where our investment dollars should be.
And Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Senator DeSteph really fully believes that goals are great. That's one of the things, we have to have a goal out there if we're going to attain it. And 2050 seems like it's a long way away, but you know what? It was Y2K just a few years ago. So I think that a lot of what Delegate Davis mentioned is a position that Senator DeSteph would echo. he does have some concerns about the recycling of batteries and solar panels, and hopefully as the technology improves, we'll see some vast changes in that as well. Tax credits, all the things that make this possible is something that he would consider.
Thank you. Our last panel question will be asked by Wendy Vaughn, and we'll start with Cheryl Turpin.
Improving and expanding transportation options in Hampton Roads is a long-standing problem. The General Assembly has given Hampton Roads permission to tax for road projects, but that does not include permission to use tax funds for other forms of transportation. Would you be willing to work to give the area the leeway to include the possibility of rail and other transportation options in future plans for these funds? Would you support adding resiliency to the SMART scale that determines how the state transportation funding is allocated?
Yes and yes. And I have 2 millennial daughters. They are 27 and 24. They have 0 interest in moving back to the city of Virginia Beach. They do not have cars. One lives in Philadelphia. And mass transit. They get from point A to point B in a timely fashion. They can move around. They don't have to worry about finding parking and just all the maintenance and upkeep of vehicles. The City of Virginia Beach and the General Assembly have to look at the way to improve our mass transit system here in this region. Absolutely.
Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Senator DeSteph has been working, as have all the other legislators, with the HRPDC on this for quite a while. It's something that, it's a funding issue, and he's working really hard to make sure that our area gets a large percentage of that funding so that we can make sure a lot of these projects come to fruition. He was a big proponent of the expansion of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and we see that that's finally happening. The I-264-64 flyover, the widening of 64, the Independence flyover, which will be happening soon. He has fought hard to try and bring $11 billion was the number he quoted me of that funding to our area, and he'll continue to fight for that to make sure that all of our transportation projects get some of this funding so we can make these all a possibility.
Thank you. Missy Smasal.
Yes, localities should have some leeway when it comes to meeting the transportation needs of their residents, and resiliency should certainly be added to the SMART scale. That's going to ensure that we do wisely allocate transportation dollars to projects that are going to be sustainable, because all of our projects going forward are going to need to focus on the region's ability to deal with higher sea levels. I think we need to be prepared for the future and make sure that we're funding projects wisely with that, and that's why the resiliency is really important to add to that scale.
Thank you. Kelly Fowler.
Well, thank you, and absolutely, I support these efforts. When we put a floor on the gas tax, we weren't considering mass transit, and that's a mistake. That needs to be included. How can we grow regionally when we can't even get from one place to another, when you can't get from one city to the next without driving a car? We can't grow, economically. We can't grow our businesses. We can't grow in a variety of ways, but I think we make the mistake of thinking that we can't grow with business and economy without looking at our environment and protecting the environment at the same time. Those can be done together. We just have to be environmentally conscious of these things. And I think that we've taken the first steps where we've, identified a goal of being, by 2050, being 100% renewable energy, and I think that's good that we're getting there, but we still have a lot of work to do, so absolutely I support those efforts.
Thank you. Glenn Davis.
So it sounds really good to say, yes, we should put resiliency in SMART scale, and I believe we definitely should consider it, but be careful what you wish for. SMART scale is what decides what road projects are done, and not just what road projects are done in our region, what road projects are done in our state. SMART scale was designed by Chris Dolly, and you want to guess where the majority of the road money has gone over the last few years? It's been to here, to our region. That's what's being used to widen 64, take care of the tunnel, all those projects. Be really careful what we wish for, because if we go play with that SMART scale project and we start looking at things where I-81 has a lot of resiliency, I think, attributes to it, we may just start shipping money out of our area and out to Southwest and up to Northern Virginia again. So we definitely should consider it, but be careful where you put that consideration. Do we need to look at mass transit? Of course we did. Look, I'm the guy that wrote the light rail referendum in 2012 when I was on city council. But also, let's look at where technology is today. I don't need tracks. We have autonomous vehicles. We can have a mass transit vehicle that goes down the right-of-way without the rail, comes off the right-of-way, goes through the tunnel, goes up the peninsula. We have new technology, so we need it. Just be careful that we don't pigeonhole the 1920 technology.
Thank you. All right, great. We're going to move to questions from the audience, and I have fantastic... Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Talk about transportation. I'm sorry. I missed Mr. Howell. Sorry.
Yes and yes.
All right, now we're going to move to questions from the audience. And I have a lot of fantastic questions here, and what I've been trying to do is group them into kind of themes or issues. So the first one that I have several cards on is about gun violence. Gun violence impacts our nation more than any other developed nation in the world, and we have experienced it firsthand in Virginia Beach. And then this one goes on to ask several questions, as do the other ones, and they include: do you support banning assault weapons in Virginia? Do you support universal background checks? And can you explain what happened in the special session? And we'll start with Kelly Fowler.
Well, let me start with special session. So in special session, I think I was, I booked a hotel room for 3 nights on Hotwire, because you know it saves you some money, and didn't realize that we wouldn't be there but for an hour and a half. So I kind of wish I had a heads up there. I thought we were going to consider legislation, and it didn't happen. That's what we're there to do. We're there to consider legislation. And we didn't do that. We punted, if that's the right analogy with football. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that we're going to have to make up for that. I think 80% of Virginians, it's a very high number of Virginians, want universal background checks. And I'm not sure why we can't consider these options. That's our job. Our job is to legislate, to consider legislation, and let it go through the legislative process. So I'm probably nearing the end of my time, but I know there were several parts to that question, but
universal background checks, assault weapon ban.
Yeah, in my district, we've actually polled in the district to see what they wanted, and universal background checks overwhelmingly. When it comes to modifications on firearms, there are different levels of modifications, but there is a want and a need for us to examine that and to figure out what modifications we should be limiting or regulating. We do have some, so I'm not going to say there isn't some already, but it shouldn't be so easy to commit so many crimes, and so many murders shouldn't happen. I think it's 3 a day in Virginia. 3 people every day die from gun violence.
Mr. Howell, for Karen Mallard.
There are other countries in the world who have just as many guns as Americans have per capita, and yet the killings are at half the rate. Where are we? Where are we in this United States? Children are getting killed in the school over and over again. Karen's going to do everything she can try to abate that. We don't have to live this way. You can't go to a mall without fear of being shot. Children are afraid to go to public places. We got to do something. And it means banning assault weapons as a beginning. It means background checks as a beginning. We got to keep going till it stops. Thank you.
Glenn Davis.
So special session came around. Most of the bills were dropped within 24 to 48 hours by both parties. No one saw the bills beforehand that were dropped that late. So we say, well, why don't we ban assault weapons? Have you looked at that bill? So I have. As most of you know, I shot competitively in high school, both 3-position small bore and pistol. And they define an assault weapon as a pistol that the magazine goes in front of the trigger. Now, one of the most used international pistols in competition happens to be a pistol, and all competition pistols have wooden blocks for handles that are actually made to fit your hand. The magazine can't go in that, it goes in front of the trigger. So at that point, we just wrapped the circle around making international shooting pistols legal in the state of Virginia. So you want to ask why we didn't take up those bills? Because we needed to be able to have time to look at them. Look, a lot of people put bills in because they wanted a soundbite for an election. That's not what we're there for. That's not why you send us there. You send us there to look at good legislation and have reasonable discussions. And that's why all those bills were sent to committees and commissions where the Secret Service came and testified, other experts came and testified, some of you and other stakeholders came and testified. And by the way, I was one of those people that put in 3 of those bills. And not show bills, real bills. Ones that stopped you from getting your concealed carry permit by taking an online firearm safety course. When does that ever make any sense? Firearm safety courses should be in person so people can ask questions. You shouldn't be able to get a concealed carry permit without ever having touched the firearm. To actually address the issue of localities having access to control guns in buildings, or to make sure that there's a way for people to address an anonymous tip line for those that think that there's issues inside of schools and there's a threat to the school. We put in real bills, they are being assessed, but we weren't doing a knee-jerk reaction, and that would have been good for the public.
Cheryl Turpin.
I went to Richmond thinking, we're going to do something. We just had a horrific event here in the city of Virginia Beach. I was disappointed. I was ashamed of what happened in Richmond. When I came home, having received my stipend, my per diem plus my mileage, I gave it to the Virginia Beach Tragedy Fund. It was like just the craziest life adventure. And when we talk about red flag laws, my brother in Indiana went to a mental health clinic and said, yes, I am suicidal, and yes, I do have firearms. And my brother left there with a card with a 1-800 number. That's all they could do for him. And 4 hours later, he put a gun to his head. We've got to do better. We must protect our citizens.
Missy Smasal.
90% of Virginians support universal background checks. Over 80% of Virginians support red flag laws, excuse me. How many years has it been since Virginia Tech? Over 12 years. How much time do lawmakers need to read bills and to study and to not have knee-jerk reactions? It is unacceptable. It is time to stand up for public safety. It is time to take gun violence prevention seriously. Our governor put in reasonable proposals that deserve to be debated. We will sit here tonight for longer than they sat in the special session after that horrible tragedy. It's time for gun violence prevention, and it's only going to come from getting a Democratic majority this year.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
Senator DeSteph has worked on a number of pieces of legislation, 27 to be exact, that were submitted for the special session. And he was as frustrated as anybody that those bills went to the Crime Commission. But that was the place where they should go. As the legislators that are up here know, there are a lot of bills that come in and out of committee, and they have to be vetted. There are details in the legislation that can have some severe unintended consequences. So to rush a piece of legislation through because it's popular, it's a good soundbite, it makes for... This is a very emotional issue for a lot of people. We suffered a tragedy here in Virginia Beach. Senator DeSteph spent a lot of time down at the municipal center during this. Trust me when I tell you that this was a very, very important special session to him. He felt it was very important that these bills be sent to the Crime Commission where they could get heard and vetted, just like they did during the Kane administration, so that what came out of there is a strong piece of legislation that will have some meaning and some impact. He has passed legislation to ensure that background checks can be done voluntarily at gun shows. You know what, folks? Come on in and have a conversation with him before we laugh about the work that he's doing, okay?
Thank you.
He has been your representative for a long time, and he welcomes the opportunity to meet with each and every one of you to discuss this important issue.
All right. Our next question has to do with workers, and there are kind of two parts to it. So the first part is, what does being a right-to-work state mean to you? And do you think that we're giving the right protections to workers? And the second part is that 41% of private sector workers, or 1.2 million people in Virginia, have no paid sick days or any paid time off. Would you support legislation that would require employers to provide 5 paid sick days per year for full-time workers? So two parts to this one, and we can go maybe a minute and a half because it's fairly complex. And we'll start with Glenn Davis.
You know, it's interesting. I was just asked how long it takes to read legislation. I was thinking the same thing about how long it takes to Google that Bloom bills were a Republican bill, but that's okay. Right-to-work laws are pretty simple. It's either you believe that someone should not have a job unless they join the union, or that they should have the right to decide if they want to join the union or not. Now, I'll tell you that this is the biggest scam, I think, being put on members of a union, because let me tell you right now, and think for a second, if you're a union member and there's a decision to raise union dues or think of something, and you're one of the 40% of the members that don't agree with what the union leadership and bosses want to do, what are your options? You can threaten them not be part of the union. You can pull your membership back. You don't have to be a member. You have leverage. The minute we lose the right-to-work laws in Virginia, union members have no leverage. You don't like what 60% of the membership says? You don't have a choice. You can quit your job, but you can't leave the union. Think about that for a second. Why do you think out-of-state unions are funding my opponent so badly? They don't care about the union membership down here. All union members, unless you're in leadership, lose your leverage the minute we become a right-to-work state, or we lose our right-to-work status. And oh, by the way, you want to know why our cost of our government is so low? Because being a right-to-work state has been what has elevated Virginia's AAA bond rating, which controls the interest on our projects, our capital projects, and that is what's kept the interest down on that debt service. We lose the right to work, the bond rating potentially goes down when we have a recession like it did last time. If you doubt me, go look at the bond ratings from Standard & Poor's. That's what they said, not what Glenn Davis said. And we need to be careful of raising the cost of government, but those are the two reasons why I do support staying a right-to-work state.
All right. Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard, and it's two parts. What does being a right-to-work state mean, and do you support that? And the second part is that 1.2 million workers in Virginia have no paid sick days. So would you support requiring employers to give full-time workers 5 paid sick days per year?
Let me answer the question about unions. Think about what they went through to be formed around the Depression, the National Labor Relations Act, what unions have done for this country to build a middle class. Why? Because corporations have so much power. An individual can't fight GM or Verizon. You really believe in that myth? One person can negotiate a decent deal with that employer? No, the unions balance things out. Now, what does the right-to-work law says? No union contract between an employer and a collective bargaining representative can require an employee as a condition of employment to join the union. What does that do? Okay, the union's doing something. They're collective bargaining. They're raising funds for a strike. They're getting some leverage to get some decent wages. And they get that. And the 45% that didn't join, we call them freeloaders. They want something for free. They don't want to pay their share. So we get an agency fee where they are required to pay their share. Right-to-work law isn't going to get repealed in Virginia in the next 20 years. It's a non-issue. It's baiting. It's baiting. Why? It ain't going to happen. Now, is she for the repeal of the right-to-work law? Yes. She's pro-union.
She grew up the daughter of a coal miner who was in the union and saw what the unions did out there for the people in Southwest Virginia. Her grandfather was a union coal miner. When unions are strong, everyone is lifted up because the non-union employers have to compete with union wages, and the non-union employees have their wages go up.
Thank you. We need to move on. Thank you. Cheryl Turpin.
I was a proud union member of the Food and Commercial Workers Union in the city of Richmond as I worked my way through college. I worked at a place called Bradley's Department Store. Many of you have been there, I'm sure. So I worked there for 3 years, and it's truly what paid my way through college. I absolutely support keeping sick people at home. By golly, we don't need to have germs in a work environment. If you're sick, you should be able to stay home. So 5 days of sick leave seems absolutely reasonable. And one thing we do know to be true is that states that have right-to-work laws tend to have economies about 3% less than those that don't have right-to-work laws. So thank you.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
It's no accident that Virginia is the top state to do business. It's because we are a right-to-work state. We are the northernmost right-to-work state on the East Coast. We've got companies like Steel expanding here in Virginia Beach. We've got other great companies expanding here in Virginia Beach. We've got companies like BMW from South Carolina looking to come to our state. But they want to be sure that we are a right-to-work state and we're not changing anytime soon. So we want to continue to attract these companies that continue to contribute to our economy and therefore contribute to the low unemployment that we're enjoying here in Virginia, the lowest in 50 years. We have to make sure that we stay a right-to-work state. We've heard from the Hotel Association, we've heard from Oceana, we've heard from different places about the importance of these union presences trying to wend their way into the organizations. We want to stay top state for business. We need to stay right-to-work state.
Missy Smasal.
Let's remember that we can be a great state for business and a great state for workers. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact, everything is better when we are working for good business and for good workers' rights. I support workers' rights to collectively bargain and to collect dues from their members. And people should not be able to freeload off of union paying dues and their services. Prevailing wages are also very important for communities. That raises economic prosperity in our communities. I also want to say in terms of paid sick leave, like Cheryl said, we don't want people coming into work sick. People are not getting sick, they're coming into work sick. And it is important for people who are taking care of elderly relatives and of young children who get sick all the time to have that flexibility in their schedule to be able to take some paid family leave time, and I support that policy.
And Kelly Fowler.
Thank you. Well, the right to work is misleading. I mean, the marketing is great on it because it doesn't sound exactly like what it is. It's not right to work. It's the right to be unprotected. We're a top. We are a top-ranking state for business, but I completely agree with Missy that we can be top for working families and we can be top for business. Employees need to be protected. They have a right to be protected. My grandmother grew up in the fields, the artichoke fields out in Southern California, and she remembers when the unions came in, and her stepfather was involved with some of that, and it was instrumental. I mean, that's a huge thing that comes in, and there's somebody there finally fighting for you and protecting you and looking out. We have a huge wage disparity. You know, there's no livable wage for people at minimum wage. So I think we have a lot of work to do. As for sick days, of course, I believe that we should. Again, it goes back to protecting workers. They're not going to just provide them what they need. We're probably gonna have to require it. I mean, and how we do that is gonna be something we're gonna have to work on, but I absolutely agree with the sick leave and that employers should provide it.
Thank you. All right, last last year in the General Assembly session, we had the opportunity to be the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And I have several questions here about whether you would support that action in this year's General Assembly. So I think we can probably go through these fairly quickly, maybe 45 seconds, and then, so we'll have time for more questions. So we'll start with Missy Smasal.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That is a very simple worded amendment to the Constitution that enshrines the rights of women I served with in the Navy, of women who worked for me at my small business, my daughters, my Girl Scouts, the girls that I've coached in basketball. They deserve to be enshrined in the Constitution, and our General Assembly has repeatedly failed under Republican leadership to ratify this amendment. It is time to flip these seats for a Democratic majority so that we can commit to ratifying the ERA and enshrining the rights of women in the Constitution for good.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
I couldn't agree more. Senator DeSteph was the chief co-patron of the ERA bill in the Senate this year. He heard from a lot of his constituents. He knows how important this is. He's the father of a beautiful young daughter. He's got a very smart chief of staff who has 2 daughters. Like I said, he was the chief co-patron. It did pass the Senate this year. It passed the Senate of Virginia this year. It did not make it out of the House. He looks forward to carrying this legislation again next year and hoping to see it all the way through.
Kelly Fowler.
I think it's really easy to carry bills when you know they're not going to pass, when you know they're going to get killed in the other house, first of all. That was a well-orchestrated plan that I witnessed, and I went into session the first year naively optimistic that things are different, that legislation is seriously considered in this place, in this General Assembly, the oldest body, the oldest governing body in the Western Hemisphere. I just couldn't believe that this would happen. But we stood all night still in a vigil with the other members of the ERA that came into town, that stood outside. My husband took a shift. He was out in the middle of the night out there standing. And for my 2 daughters, almost 3 daughters, this has to happen this year.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Karen's for it, but I have to tell a story to put it in context. The Virginia Constitution, Equal Rights Amendment, prohibits discrimination based on sex. We have the Equal Rights Amendment in the Virginia Constitution because my father in 1969, on the floor of the Senate, had it added as an improper basis for discrimination. He also, on the same amendment, or a comparable one, had the word that public servants are to practice Christian virtues. He had Christian taken out. Well, let me just give the headline. He said, stop. In the Lynchburg paper, Howe moves to put sex in the Constitution and take Christianity out.
Glenn Davis.
So women are equal to men, and it doesn't take the government to say so. My mom's here. The 2 strongest women I know are my grandparents on both sides. Women are equal. They've always been equal. They should always be equal. And in many cases, they are just, you know, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the women in my life. Now, we take it over to the ERA. Where am I on that? There's 2 issues. One is Ruth Gator Ginsburg. She's the most probably adamant supporter, but in September of this year, she said, I was a proponent of the Equal Rights Amendment. I hope someday it will be put back in the political hopper and we'll be starting over again, collecting the necessary states to ratify it. She's saying this thing has to go back to Congress. We know it expired. We need something. But I will tell you something is also, and I'd like you just to look at it, because I'm not an attorney, but look at what happened in Pennsylvania when they adopted the ERA amendment over there and supported it. It flipped Title IX on its head. You know, Title IX that started out as equality for academics and universities became equality then for sports. Well, all of a sudden now, you've got men playing on women's teams, and there's an article about ice hockey players on field hockey teams being a safety issue reported by the women. We just got to make sure we don't take spots for our women and for our females because we flipped Title IX upside down. At least take a look at that.
Cheryl Turpin.
I am absolutely 100% for the Equal Rights Amendment. I marched in the 1970s in D.C. My mom took me and my girlfriend, and we were 14 years old, and we got on the subway, we got off the subway, and we marched, and it was god-awful hot, and we didn't have water bottles back then. We had these little Boy Scout canteens that tasted like aluminum or whatever they were made out of, and it was hot water, and it was disgusting, but golly, it was the best thing we ever had that day. So absolutely, I have two amazing daughters, 127, 124. They deserve to be treated equally. Thank you.
All right, our next questions are another easy topic, health care. Just joking. So we have several questions about Medicaid is controversial due to the cost to Virginia. Would you support Medicare for all to save Virginia and Virginia Beach money? If elected, what would you do to keep health care costs down? And what can you do to address access to mental health services? Oh, I'm sorry, and we'll start with Glenn Davis.
Sure. Boy, I wish Karen was here for this one. So I put in the Medicaid expansion bill in 2014. Ignore what you get mail from her. Andy Fox fixed it today. But I put in the Medicaid expansion bill in 2014, supported it ever since, because we needed affordable access to health care for all of Virginians. Then I spent 4 years fighting insurance companies in the General Assembly because insurance companies want the right to deny you getting treatments that your doctor recommends when you have serious disease and illnesses, cancer, MS, you name it. So I had to fight them to not have that ability anymore, and finally got that through. Now we need to protect to ensure that people have access to those treatments they need and the quality of care that they truly need. Look, Medicare for all impacts the quality of care. There's a number of things I think we can do, and we have to protect Medicaid as we've got it in there. And we need to make sure that those that still have problems with the Medicaid system as it exists are able to get the efficiency of care that we thought we promised and tried to deliver when we voted for it in the General Assembly. But we need to be careful trying to put everyone in Medicare and impacting the quality of care for our seniors and honestly those that are getting finally the care that they need.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
Karen was for Medicare expansion, is for Medicare expansion, is for protecting it. That's just a stopgap. It helped a lot of people in Virginia get some insurance, get some sense of security for their health. But I tell you, Karen's concern is children. We got to have healthy children. And healthy children got to have healthy parents. And only healthy people work. So we got to make sure everyone has access to health care one way or another. And it can't be emergency rooms. For the good of everyone. And she'll be working on that if she, well, when she gets, but what, you know, if she gets there, you understand my point. She's going to be great.
Cheryl Turpin.
I have a complete understanding of the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare. I know that we only have the expansion of Medicaid because of the directions of the Affordable Care Act. As well as the protection of pre-existing conditions. There was a time in my life that I worried about getting pregnant before I got a job that I had health care because I would not have had coverage for my pregnancy because that was considered a pre-existing condition going into my dream job. That's just a bizarre concept that, you know, just being pregnant could be considered a pre-existing condition. So, you know, we need to protect what's already available, and I'm glad to have voted to expand Medicaid.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
This is actually a really big question. There are a lot of parts to it.
Mm-hmm.
Senator DeSteph worked with a number of his colleagues this year to pass a lot of different health care legislation that really would be very beneficial to all of Virginians, not just his constituents. A lot of those pieces, unfortunately, were actually vetoed by the government, by the governor. They allowed pooling, businesses to pool their resources to be able to provide lower healthcare costs. He was fortunate to pass the autism bill that allowed for the coverage of for kids well into adulthood and beyond. But one thing I think is worth noting, Medicaid expansion, he felt first and foremost that our responsibility is to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. And that includes the thousands of people that are still waiting for their Medicaid waivers. He supported funding those waivers first before we allowed anybody else to be able to receive that funding. Again, those who cannot help themselves need to be helped first. Thank you.
Missy Smasal.
I'm proud of the work that some of the people did on this stage to expand Medicaid. And I would just like everyone to know that Bill DeSteph voted against Medicaid expansion, which would have denied more than 5,000 people in his own district from getting health care. Not only did he do that, but he has also signed on to bills that would allow insurance companies to deny people for pre-existing conditions. And most importantly, when asked about denying Medicaid expansion, he said if he were king for a day, the one thing he would do would be repeal the ACA. If you were king or queen for a day, think of the amazing things that you could do. Taking healthcare away from people should not be one of them.
Kelly Fowler.
Thank you. I think for a minute I just wanted to point out, you know, we did expand Medicaid, and I know we talk a lot about that, and the money that it freed up. That was amazing that we were able to give teachers a 5% raise, which is a bigger raise than they've gotten in the last decade. So there are things that came from that weren't just about healthcare, but things that we needed. There are over 14,000 Virginia Beach residents who now have Medicaid because of the expansion. 14,000. Now, those 14,000 people now have health care, and think about how instrumental that changes their lives, that they can go and to the doctor when they need to, they can get the preventative care. So, you know, absolutely, affordable access to health care is so important, and to help those who need it. And we need to, I know we have, a lot of people haven't been able to get to the mental health part of this. It's a two-part question, but I have 15 seconds. But we need to remove the stigma that is involved with mental illnesses, because we didn't provide them the services.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more audience question, but before we ask that one, I want to address campaign contributions, because we have several questions that ask about campaign contributions, and rather than spend time doing that, you can go to the VPAP website, Virginia Public Access Project, vpap.org, and you can see the list of donors for every candidate. So if you are interested in who's donating to which campaigns, all of that information is on VPAP. They even have a graphic that shows what percentage of contributions are coming from small donors, from businesses, that kind of thing. So all of that information is available to you on vpap.org. And our last question before our closing statements is, our region is very diverse, and unlike the stage tonight. How are you going to make your constituents feel they are included in policy making, social equity, and for environmental justice and a fair share of the economy? And we'll start with, who are we starting with? Cheryl Turpin.
Inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. As a high school science teacher, we treat all students equally. And when things aren't being done correctly in the high schools, we point out the problems, we work tirelessly to correct them. For me, it was young women and their clothing. I had kids miss my test because they had a hole in their trousers. Are we there to judge their clothing, or are we there to make sure they're being educated? And we've got so many things to do, but absolutely roundtables, forums, things that get everybody engaged, get their voices, have them heard. It's what you should do as a legislative representative, as an elected official, is to make sure everybody feels included.
Thank you. Kelly Fowler.
Well, I think I joined the General Assembly in a year where we changed the makeup of the General Assembly to be more reflective of what Virginia actually looks like, which is exciting. There's more women, there's more minorities, and that is what we need. We need a reflective legislature that represents us. And I've held roundtables in reference to environmental issues and flooding, and we kind of worked on legislation from that. And I think it's really important to have our offices opened. But you know, there are a lot of legislators who are there for a very long time, and I think we need to have term limits. We need to have some accountability where they have to be open to their constituents. And I know we vote, but you know, there is a problem we have with money in politics. So I am one of several, actually quite a bit of the General Assembly that actually does not take money from public service corporations, Dominion Power. And I think we're headed in the right direction to be accountable to our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Missy Smasal.
Yes, I agree that diversity should be reflected in the makeup of our General Assembly. It should also be reflected in the makeup of our campaign staffs, our campaign advisors, and staffs in general. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to issues across the table. Unfortunately, tonight we didn't talk a lot about environmental justice, but people in low-income communities disproportionately feel the effects of climate change. And that's something that we all need to recognize and make sure we reflect that value in our budget decisions and allocations. So definitely making sure that we're being inclusive, focused on including all viewpoints, focused on good education funding, especially too for all of our schools across the board.
Ms. Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
If you know Bill DeSteph, you know that he's a friend to everyone. He's got an open door policy, City Council, House of Delegates, the Senate. If you want to come to him to talk to him about a problem, he's there to listen. If there's a piece of legislation that you think is important, he wants to know about it. He believes in an inclusive community. I mean, this is who we are. This is where we want to be. There's no conversation that he wouldn't have on any kind of legislation. You guys know Bill. I mean, he's been around here for a long time, not just as an elected official, but as a coach, as a neighbor. Just check out his endorsements. The diversity in his endorsements, the wide range of people that think that he is doing a good job and will continue to do a good job. He believes in the equality of all people, and he will continue to bring that to his next term as senator.
Glenn Davis.
Well, the first thing you do is you have an open door policy, and you make sure everyone feels welcome to come see you. And I see a lot of people here that I've had a lot of those conversations with over time in my office. The second thing you do is you support everyone. As a Republican, I was the only person this year to sign on to a bill for non-discrimination in housing for LGBTQ members, and then force that vote to the floor. And when I force that vote to a floor, you know, if you don't understand what it's like to take on your party, I got news for you. It's a lot harder than just showing up here for a debate. But that's what you need to do. You need to actually say you support groups. You need to show you support groups with your votes. And you need to have civility to make them feel welcome. Look, I'm dealing with more mail pieces of me having horns on my head that I can count with. And this does not make people feel comfortable walking into a politician or being involved in politics. I've knocked on more doors, and y'all have seen it too. People are tired of politics. They don't want to talk to anyone in politics. They're scared someone's going to yell at them. They're scared that this person's got horn under their heads. If we don't realize how to sit down and have a rational conversation again amongst each other that disagree, I'm just scared where our city, our state, and our nation is going to go. So that's probably the first issue.
And Mr. Howell.
The question was on diversity and environmental justice. Well, Karen comes from a poor family from Southwest Virginia that came up from nothing. Her dad didn't know how to read. She'd been a public school teacher, working with elementary school, teaching them to read. She deals with the front line of our diverse community. She knows who can't eat.
in the morning is malnutrition, whose parents are going through a hard time, who's getting abused. She's been there. She knows it. She's lived it 33 years. She works with them. She, you know, that's what she's going to take up to Richmond. I mean, I hope you get it. Environmental justice, yeah. 11 years old, goes down to City Hall and says, you got to move that sewage plant. That ain't right. The poor people, we baptize in it. You got to move it. And then got her dad on her side. I mean, come on. If you're for the environment, for diversity, for justice, I hope it's clear the type of person Karen is, and she's entitled to your support.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our closing statements, and but I want to include a couple of questions here if you want to address these with your closing statement. I have one, what is your proudest achievement, and another, what is your greatest achievement? Kind of similar questions. So if you want to include that in your closing statement, please do, and we'll give everybody 2 minutes. And we'll start with Jill Eiler for Bill DeSteph.
This is going to be brief because obviously Senator DeSteph should be the one to be giving you this closing statement. I just hope that you will consider the good work that he has done and that he plans to continue to do as the senator representing the 8th District. It's an honor for him to serve you. He truly has the best interests of our community at heart. He has an open door policy. He wants to hear from you. He wants to hear your thoughts. He wants to help you when you need help with things. The man does not sleep. And truly, you can text him anytime, day or night, and he will be the first one calling you in the morning to try and solve your problem. I'd like to tell you that his proudest moment was hiring me. Or perhaps it was his happiest moment. But in all seriousness, we work well together. I've known Bill since he was the soccer coach for my daughter, since our kids were on swim team together. We live geographically very nearby, same neighborhood. I've just known him for a long time. He's a good man, and I hope you will remember that when it's time to vote. He has pledged not to campaign negatively. He chooses an honorable path. And I also hope you will consider that when you go to the poll, because that is a very important quality in our legislator and in a person. Thank you.
Cheryl Turpin.
My proudest moment was when we signed my House Bill 2147 into law. It was simply to move resources from schools that were identified as struggling. In the past, they would be identified, and they'd have to struggle for an additional 3 years before the state said, okay, you proved yourself as a struggling school. Here's your resources. Here's what you need to be successful. So my bill simply said the money was already there. Let's go ahead and give it to them on year 1. So when a school is identified as struggling, can you imagine being a kid in 1st grade and having to wait until 4th grade for the state to say, oh my goodness, you've struggled long enough. So now we do it on year 1. So the kids can learn to read. They can do the things. They bring the resources that the schools need. My second greatest thing was to push that button as yes for the expansion of Medicaid. Again, I'm Cheryl Turpin. I'm an AP Environmental Science teacher, a part-time state legislator. You're currently sitting in my House district. And it would be my absolute honor to move on to the Virginia Senate 7 seat, and I look forward to serving you in that position. Thank you so much.
Missy Smasal.
Thank you to Lynnhaven River Now for hosting the forum tonight. The people of Virginia Beach want their lawmakers to be focused on addressing climate change and sea level rise. But for too long, the Republican lawmakers in the majority have dragged their feet, costing us millions of dollars and putting the investments that we've all made in our homes and businesses at risk. And now they're asking for another chance. But we can't leave the solutions to the people who refuse to acknowledge the problem in the first place. It's time for new leaders. As a small business owner, I had to close my store on a few occasions so that my employees could get home safely when it was raining before the roads would be too flooded. I put their safety above profits. But my opponent, DeSteph, is a developer who repeatedly tried to profit from building in the green zone in Virginia Beach, a transition area, even though he was told it would exacerbate flooding for his own constituents. He was putting his personal profits ahead of residents' safety and security. Clean energy also requires clean government. DeSteph not only takes campaign contributions from Dominion Energy, which is a regulated utility that he is supposed to be one of the ones regulating, but he is also personally invested in Dominion Energy by over $250,000. When your electricity rates go up, he makes money. And he is a vocal proponent of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and stands to make a lot of money as a stockholder with its construction. I'm proud to be endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters and by the Sierra Club. And one of the things that I wrote on both of those essays is that if elected, I will commit to bringing forward ethics legislation to prevent conflicts of interest such as those. I am proud to stand to ban offshore drilling, to build coalitions for responsible land conservation, and I hope I can earn your vote on November 5th.
Glenn Davis.
I'm getting a little bit tired of Republicans being blamed for this or Democrats being blamed for that. Look, we've had Republicans do a lot of good things in the General Assembly. John Watkins was an amazing Republican, and if y'all know him, he was one of the first people that wrote Medicaid expansion in the Senate. Joe May, an amazing Republican. We've had great Democrats as well. The more we talk about you're to blame and you're to blame, the more people, honestly, just want to tune us all out. And if we don't figure that out, we're not going to get anywhere. My proudest moment is still when I was on city council. You know, it's easy to act like you're supposed to act when you have a party label on your head. It's a little bit harder when you have a party label and they act a little bit differently. So in 2012, when education funding was cut by the state with the composite index and transportation maintenance was cut to zero, and our city manager said we need a 4-cent tax increase, and I went to see Will Sessoms. And I said, Will, we know what the school board's been saying. They need 4 cents. We need 2 cents for transportation. We need 6 cents, not 4. And I'll push it, but I want to write it. And I wrote the 6-cent tax increase for property tax. It's still the lowest tax rate of every fee and tax in the city when we did that. But I wrote it, and I put it in there, and I ran for re-election that same year on it. I had people call me and say, Glenn, thank you for putting that in there. We appreciate it, but we know you can't vote for it because we need you to stay up there. And I had people that called me and said, Glenn, if you vote for this, we're going to run someone against you, and if you don't, you're going to get free ride. And I told them both the same thing. Not only did I write it so you know what I'm going to do, but I just don't vote. I tend to be very vocal about my support. And I voted for it, and I was vocal about it, and when I ran for re-election, the speech is still online in 2012. And what it talks about is how proud I was to stand my ground and how I was running on the fact that we protected the services that the city recommended and they wanted on that tax increase. And I won by almost 60% of the vote. Look, there's very few things in life that you get to figure out what your character's made of. You know, you can tell yourself all the time that I would do this and I would do that, and I will tell you, unless you've been in a seat, staring down 40 of your colleagues saying, I'm going to be something different and getting those calls from leadership, you have no idea. So I've sat here because I want to make sure that I've had a chance to represent the citizens like I've done for the last 10 years. And I wish my opponent would sit here and start answering some of these questions as well, because people deserve to know whether she's going to defend things when times get tough also.
Mr. Howell for Karen Mallard.
This was a forum for answering questions, not debating. And Mr. Davis has politicized this thing, emotionalized it. You all have heard about Karen. I think I've done a pretty good job letting you know what you're getting. You know, if you're a Republican, you're going to have to vote for a Democrat. But just think, it's a school teacher. They sign it. They kind of rise above it all. And you can go to the websites and read whatever they say.
But she's a school teacher, an elementary school teacher. What's her major accomplishment? A good life lived. If she loses, she's going back to a great life. And she'll come back and she'll be helping kids because, man, it is all about the kids. And that means the environment that we leave them. And she will be good up there, networking, getting people to like her, getting people to sit down with her and listen. That's what you need in Richmond. You want the person saying, God, I love seeing Karen come into my office. I don't care if I disagree with her. She's fun. She's a school teacher. She's had to stimulate 9 and 8-year-olds to keep them interested in reading. Think she can do some of those old white men up there? Sure she can. You've gotten plenty to consider here. I hope you spread the word. And you've gotten good commitments from every candidate up here because you made them come, and it's a wonderful thing. And Karen doesn't mind showing up. She had to be someplace else. And now he's still arguing. He showed up for the NAACP, and they had a great debate, and he was saying the same stuff, but I think I've done a pretty good job representing her. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Kelly Fowler.
Well, thank you so much to Lynnhaven River Now and the panelists. We appreciate you putting this together and giving the community an opportunity to hear from all the panelists. I think it's important to be able to hear from all the candidates. One of my proudest moments, one of them, and it didn't just include me, was kind of a roller coaster this last session. It was when my flood disclosure bill passed committee, and then it suddenly didn't go where it should have went into the House floor. And then that was the roller coaster part because it was called back and it was then killed for no reason. It was legislation that we all could agree on. And there's a good ending to the story because it did pass. But it took work of legislators on both sides of the aisle. And now the legislation that I wrote was in two other people's bills, one Democrat, one Republican. And that was a good story, a good thing that happened out of that. But it took a lot of work, and there was a lot of us that worked on that bill. So now that people can have the disclosure and have more information when they go to buy or rent a house if they're going to be living in a flood zone, I think that's important. A step in the right direction. But ultimately, my most proudest thing, I would say, is not a moment. It's doing this. It's showing up. My constituents know they can count on me, and I think that's really important. And so my name is Kelly Fowler, and I'm running for re-election in the 21st District, and I hope I've earned your vote today. Thank you.
This is our third forum this year and our final one. Last week and this week, Rob McCausland has volunteered his time to videotape these. So last week we had 3 other delegate districts represented, and that is on YouTube, but you can find the link to it on the homepage of our website. So if you go to lrnow.org, and one of the main stories on the front page has a big "Every Vote Counts" circle on it, and in that story is the link to last week's forum, and we will soon have up the link to this week's forum. And then the one that we did on October 2nd was for city, all the city offices on the ballot. And the closing statements from those candidates are also on our website. If you want to go back and look at them or share them with someone else. So thank you, Rob, for donating your time to put together the videotape for us. I also want to thank the panelists and our timekeeper. Emil has been here for all 3 forums. Thank you. Thank you to Ziders Theater. They've been great to host us and work with us on these forums. Thank you for attending and being engaged, and don't forget to vote on November 5th and take all your friends and neighbors and coworkers to the polls too. And my biggest thank you is to the candidates for both for spending your evening with us, but also for just being willing to put yourself out there. It's a big effort and a big contribution to our city and our region, so thank you. And in-person absentee voting is already open, so if you're not going to be around on the 5th, you can go down to the municipal center and vote absentee now. So thank you all for coming.